right, welcome back to another episode of Car Stories with Sung Kang
and Emelia Hartford.
And today we get to talk to a old friend of ours, Brian Scotto, one of the founders of Hoonigan, and a person that just had an illustrious journey in his life, from wanting to be an engineer to being a journalist, and eventually founding one of the most influential, I guess, car content
media houses today.
Yeah.
You know, I've known Brian for quite some time, and he's always been such a huge supporter of at least everything I do in the space. But I don't know that I got to hear his story to the level that we heard it in this conversation.
Yeah. And we got to talk about legacy, or what did we eventually call it?
Inspiration.
Inspiration.
Yeah.
One's inspiration in this, what inspiration one leaves on this earth before we go away.
Yeah, and also the different eras or chapters that he feels he's had in his life, and also what's to come. So.
All right. Well, so enjoy this conversation with our old buddy, Brian Scotto. So Brian, speaking of driving, let's start with the seed that got you into cars. Like, where did that start? Can you share with us?
Yeah, so my background, I grew up in New York City, and as you know, it's like the capital of driving cars, right? No, absolutely not. Like I still have friends who are in their 40s that never got their driver's license.
Wow.
Because like the subway is great, and like ride bikes, like you don't really need cars. But my grandfather, which is my dad's dad, he was like a rags to riches story. And when he did make money later on in his life, in like his like sort of like mid 50s, he just spent it all on cars. So he actually passed away when I was 8, but when he passed away, he had I think like 18 or 19 cars. So for me, like having this like huge hoard of cars is like kind of just normal. That was sort of like what I grew up around. And he had like a really weird mix of stuff. He had everything from like Auburns and like a bunch of other like, and then pre-war cars. But then he also had 2 Corvettes. Actually, I guess he had 3 Corvettes. He had a DeLorean, which like you have to understand, like as a kid, like you don't remember this time because you're a youngster.
I know what a DeLorean is.
No, I know you know what it is, but you don't remember when Back to the Future was in theaters.
Okay, not the theaters part, but I remember the
movie. And like as a kid, like that was just the coolest thing, and that car felt like it was the future. It felt like it was the coolest thing ever. He only had it for a short period of time because he bought it and was like, this thing's junk. And that also kind of crushed me because my grandpa was like, this car's trash. Like, I don't want it. But I got to like be around all that, and I think I was like, I don't know. It's probably about 6, and I was in the passenger seat of his 57 Vet, and like his buddy, we were like on this 2-lane road out in the Hamptons, and his buddy like went to go pass him because he was like kind of driving slow with me, and my grandfather like just dropped second gear and like broke the tires free, and like the car was like all over the place, and he turned to me and he just said, "Don't ever tell your mom about that." And it was just this moment that like after that I was like, I want to do that. Like that seems like so much fun. So yeah, that kind of just stuck with me. And then from there, when I was young, I was really pragmatic. So like everybody else that was into cars I knew were like reading Hot Rod magazine, all that when they were like 13, 14. And I was like, I can't afford a car now. So, and I can't even drive. I don't have the ability to get a license. So I got really into like RC cars. I was like heavily into that. Like I started my own RC car club, and like I started like making my own like parts and stuff like that. And then as I got older, I was also really into snowboarding, skateboarding, riding BMX, and cars became this important thing to like get to the skate park or get to the mountain to go ride or do something like that. And at that time in the mid 90s, like Volkswagens kind of were like sort of at the forefront of that. I felt like they were doing commercials with K2 and Trek, and there was this huge community of people in the snowboard world who all had like Volkswagens and Audis. So I ended up getting into that, and then like super fell into it, started my own car club, and it was always that like hobby side. So but like it was a weird one for me because none of my childhood friends were into cars. It's like it just wasn't a thing. Like they may have thought cars were cool, but they just didn't care about it. So this like for the longest time, cars was sort of this like secret hobby for me, right? Like I was writing graffiti and like doing all this other stuff, like riding bikes and all this stuff with my friends. Like that's what like a normal New York City life was. But I also like really, really enjoyed car culture, and it was just, especially until I kind of learned where it all lived, it felt hidden from me. Like, you know, going to the New York Auto Show was like the only thing that felt like I was like a part of car culture when I was a teenager. You know, otherwise it didn't really exist. Like I lived in a neighborhood where people didn't have fancy cars. Like cars were just, were just transportation. So.
Yeah, it sounds like, well, anytime I speak to you, you know, like you would have been a great like class president. Because you're great at like organizing people together, right?
Yeah,
where does that come from? Is that from the grandfather or your dad? Or?
I think it's from my mom. My mom, both my parents are scientists, and my mom has very much like that, like leadership kind of administrative personality. That's just like how she is. Yeah, and actually, my mom is the reason I started a car club, because I bought this Volkswagen. It was a 4-door Mark III, slammed like way too low, and even back then. And,
while living in New York?
Yeah, while living in New York.
Okay.
Like I actually had to build a bash guard because the car was so low that I would constantly take the oil pan off of it on like all of the roads there, because we have such bad potholes and like frost heaves, and like they put down these like big metal plates in New York everywhere. So you'll like be driving and all of a sudden you change lanes and you just hit a metal plate and just rip your oil pan right off. So I had like basically a rally car that was slammed to the floor just so I could drive through New York City and not destroy my car. But I went to school at University of Vermont, and like in Vermont, I knew like a couple people who were into cars. So I had this like little group of people up there that I hung out with, and I came home from school and was not going back to Vermont, and I was like sitting at home, and it was like the summer, and I just was complaining to my mom. I'm like, yeah, I just like a bummer. Like I don't really know anyone who's into cars, and all the few people I've met, like they're all Honda guys, and like I just didn't like have a kin to them. It was like a different world from the VW side. And my mom said like, well, why don't you just like start your own car club? I was like 19. I'm like, oh, like how would I do that? She's like, I don't know, go figure it out. Like just, I'm sure you can figure it out. And I did that, started my own car club, and within a year later, like we had like 30 members. But what was the important part was like we started doing events. So we started doing a monthly cruise. So we did this thing called, the car club was called Autokrieg, and which like loosely translates in German to like automotive competition or something, like Auto Wars, whatever. When I was 19, it sounded great. But we started it. It was like this small group of people who were like basically lived in like New York City and a little bit of Long Island. And at least when we started, and from there we started doing events, and we came up with this idea, which like I look back at it now as an adult who has like things that like people could take from me in a lawsuit, and I realize like how little liability like we had on any of this. And but we'd started this cruise. We found a bunch of windy roads out in Long Island, which we realized like growing up in New York, like it's a grid. So like there was no fun roads to drive. So there was obviously a street race community that like operated a lot in Brooklyn and Queens, but I wasn't really into that. Like I went and I enjoyed watching it, and it was kind of like fun to be a part of that until Fast and Furious came out and ruined the entire scene. We'll talk about that later. But,
so sorry.
But I was more into like the dynamic element, right? Like corners and like driving canyon style roads. Well, not that we had that in New York, but we did have some windy, like, you know, forest roads out in Long Island. So I went, I found them all, and we started doing this event. We called it Full Moon, Full Throttle. And the idea was that the Friday closest to the full moon, we would meet in a rest area off of the Long Island Expressway at midnight. And then we would go drive the roads for like 2.5 hours and then go home. And like it started with 20 cars. And by the time we did the last one, we had 175 cars show up.
Wow.
And I was like 20 years old trying to organize this with like walkie-talkies and we, through all of it, we only had 2 accidents the whole time, and they were like minor, like, you know, just slide off, hit a rim or hit a telephone pole. No one else ever got hurt, but like it was amazing that we did them for, I think we did 23 or 24 of them. So we ran it for 2 years as a monthly event. And that at the time, like it was just a hobby. I never thought that my career would be in automotive, but that was this thing that like I loved it. I loved creating this thing for the community. I was stoked because it wasn't my car club that was only showing up. My car club never really grew to be more than 25 or 30 people. So it just became this thing for like the whole community, and it was all Volkswagens and all Audis. So I went from feeling like there was no community around that to sort of creating something that became this hub for all of it. And then we also did We also did a car show event because at the time, like car shows were like really, really stressful. Like, you know, you'd have someone judging your car and they were like, you know, using like a white cloth to make sure your thing was clean. And like, I didn't want that. I just wanted to like go and show up like what the modern like meet, like a Cars and Coffee became. But back then it was like, you have to be here. Roll-ins at 6 a.m. Like you've got to be, and you can't leave till 4 p.m. and blah, 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 blah. And you got to be standing by your car for these 4 hours. So when the judges come by, like you can walk them through the car. And it was like, that wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted this like cool hangout experience. And we created it. We did this event called Dub and Grub, which was a ton of fun. And we made it like people's choice, so that way like people didn't really get that stressed about like judging. And we would make fun of people if they were like cleaning their car during the event. Like just come and hang out, and like it's potluck, like bring your own meals. And by the time we got to like the third or fourth one, like people were like cooking pigs and like bringing full pigs to the event. Like it was this like amazing experience, because you also think of like how culturally diverse Queens is, which is where like we had the event. So it's like the amount of different types of food we had there was like awesome. So it just became this like rad like feast for all these people in the car community, especially in the Volkswagen Audi. It started to grow bigger than that later on to do. And that for me was such a, like, I think that's when I realized like as much as I enjoyed cars myself, a big part of it was like the community around cars and like all of that. And, you know, you fast forward from there, and two of the guys who were in my car club, like, you know, 15 years later stood next to me at my wedding, you know? So yeah, to me, the car community part of it was always the big part of it. And like being able to tie that into like going driving and doing all of that. So yeah, that was, I don't know. I kind of you asked me one question, went to my mom,
great.
got
Just
back
keep-
there.
No, we wanted to hear all of this.
Here we are now. So yeah, that was like, and that was at the time, it's crazy because I was going to school and I'm sitting here like bailing on class so I could like plan these events. And it's funny because at the time I knew how just like irresponsible that was, but like I was enjoying it so much. But now looking at where I sit today, I'm like, oh, I should have skipped more classes and learned more of it, because I was learning more doing all that. And I was also like using things at school to be able to like design flyers. Like I'm going into like the computer lab and like using the equipment to like do stuff for my car club. And at no point while I was doing that did I think that this was gonna be my career. Instead, I saw it as like this major distraction from what I was trying to do in school and put all of that together.
Why engineering? Where'd you start there?
Like I said, both my parents were scientists. You grow up in a world where like academia is that important. Calculus, all of that stuff like was second nature to me. So it was like, oh, you know math really well, then you should go and do engineering. You know, you take your aptitude test and you're like, oh, I should either be an underwater welder or I should be an engineer. And it was like, oh, I hate swimming. So I was like, I guess I'll be an engineer. And I wanted to design cars and build stuff. And that's where I thought my engineering degree would go. But yeah, the engineering thing, I wanted to build stuff and I wanted to make stuff. And it's still like how my brain works, and what I really enjoy is like making things. And that's even how I approach content and like creative is like I enjoy the building of things, right? Like that's the thing I really enjoy, and building new things. And I think it was very obvious to me early on in an engineering program that like I was never going to be one of the best. I was going to be someone else's number monkey, which meant I was never going to get to like lead design and be that. Instead, I'd be the one helping someone else do it. And that made me lose a bit of interest in it. Yeah. So, and then I mean, this ends up being an entire podcast about my college career. But
Did you get your degree?
I did not. I'm 6 credits short, which is a funny story because I ended up like third year, 3.5 years in. I take a journalism class and I fell in love. It was the first time where I wouldn't miss class. I loved it, and it was one of my favorite things. And I also had a fantastic professor because she actually, because it was my elective, I didn't take it as seriously as a lot of my other stuff, even though I enjoyed it. But when it came down to finals, I was like more thrashing on all these other classes that I was barely showing up to and I needed to study for. And this class, I thought like, I'm doing well in it. It doesn't matter. And I handed in my final like article, like paper late, and she gave me a D. And I was like, oh, this sucks. She gave me a D in this, and like I wanted to do the minor, but like now I got to go back and take this class again to apply for my minor. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm not going to do it. So I ended up backing out of the program, and she called me and said, hey, I saw that you backed out of the program. And she basically gave me the story of like, look, in journalism, if you're late, it doesn't print. So it didn't happen. So like, you can't be late, right? But she kind of gave me that pep talk of like, you have a really good knack for this. I don't want to see you drop the minor. Like, I will retroactively fix this, but you need to go and, can maintain a grade of whatever in the rest of the program and do all of this. So
that's awfully kind.
It was, but in the end, it didn't matter because I never got my diploma.
Sure.
But what mattered was she, in a world of like, I had only ever been applauded for like my scientific side of like thinking. She was the first person to ever say like, you're good at storytelling. You understand this. Like, this is something that I think you really should like chase after. So then I started taking film classes and all these different media classes, and everything shift, and all of a sudden I was like really interested to go to school again, and I really enjoyed it, where like science was easy for me, and that's why I did it. This has been a bit of I think this isn't car stories, it's not like college stories, but but this is how I got here.
Yeah.
So.
Cars are the connective tissue of what brings us all here.
Yeah.
And your story, like your trajectory is so clear to what you do and what you've built today, from organizing a car crew to entrepreneurship to engineering, essentially building with your hands to...
In a weird way, it all like lined up,
Yeah.
right? But like when it was happening, I don't think I was like, I'm on this great trajectory. Like while it's happening, you're like, this didn't work out, this failed out. And there was certainly a period of time where, I got that talk from my dad, which was like, maybe school's not for you. Like maybe you should, join a labor union. Maybe you should go do that. Something. And my dad came from like a blue collar family, so he was like, maybe what you need to go do, because you're not enjoying school, and I wasn't. And then it all just sort of turned around, and I realized that like the things that made me happy, and my dad, I used to always refer to it as like pink collar, which was like, I enjoy the white collar work of creative, but I need to touch it and be a part of it. And like, even when we're on set filming, like I always talk to the grips, because like I enjoy building erector sets to mount cameras to things.
I love that pink collar. I'm going to borrow that. I've
Yeah.
never
Pink
heard
collar.
that pink collar.
Essentially, what you do today is storytelling literally storytelling with content creation, but also building cars. Every car has a story.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's like such a big part for me, is the story of cars. Like we always talk about this internally at Hoonigan. It's like cars need a name. Because once you name them, then like they stand out and they have a personality.
They become alive.
Do
you have a name for your Sienna?
No, I've been, after you talked about, that's probably, I have two cars that I don't have names.
Because you're really good with naming your vehicles.
Yeah, because I can't name them until
18. We'll call her 18.
I build them up. Like they have to, I have to have my hands on it, and I have to like spend time with it.
But at the same time, you don't want to build the Sienna up. Because you and I have talked about this, like, why don't you have wheels on it? Because then it's not,
I don't want to
you like the practicalness of it right now.
Yeah,
That's what excites
the
you
low
about
key,
the car.
like I'm invisible.
Yeah.
Like, I can, if it's all pimped out, I can't park in front of like your house and I just sleep. They're like, who is that dude with those big old wheels?
Think how different his thought process is on cars than mine and yours.
I know.
Like, we're sitting there being like, all right, how much power can this take before I put a window through the block, right? And he's sitting there going, can I sleep in the back in Beverly Hills?
Will an air mattress fit? Will someone wake me up?
Yeah, exactly. Are the windows dark enough that they won't see me, but the cops won't pull me over? Like, what's that threshold? This is where his brain's at. Yeah.
I'd love to see the neighbor just walk out and knock to be like, who's sleeping out here? And it's you that crawls out of the Sienna.
Oh, I'm sure that there's been photos of him on Nextdoor where people are like, suspicious man. He drives around in a minivan. He doesn't have any kids. There's something wrong with this guy.
I mean, it's funny is that either people really love the fact that I drive a minivan, right? And they're like, you drive a minivan? That's so awesome. Or it's complete disappointment.
Oh, right.
Complete,
like it's not what they
expect.
Thought it was going to be.
Yeah, they don't want that.
Yeah.
You show up to a valet and they're like, they come out and they're like, oh my God. And they're like, what are you driving a minivan for? And I try to explain to them. I'm like, hey man, it has 18 cup holders. It's 36 miles a gallon.
Oh, I get it. Because there's certain, like, I'll go to meetings and I know that, like, as when I show up, people are going to be like, what did you drive? You're like, if you don't drive something fun, then you lose that perception thing. So sometimes I've definitely like sat in traffic in cars I don't want to drive to go to places, and then you get there and you're like, oh, no one even cared what I drove today.
Yeah, they didn't ask. You're like, fuck.
I could have just driven something with air conditioning. Yeah.
And a not so stiff clutch.
Yeah, exactly. So, or something I didn't have to stop 3 times to let it cool down on the way there.
I want to talk about legacy. When you guys built out Hoonigan, like, did you feel like this is going to be your legacy, and how do you feel about that now?
I mean, it's interesting. Legacy is like such a weird thing to think about. I think there's a quote somewhere. I don't know if everyone's seen it or was in something that Ken was like, I hate the word legacy because if you're talking about my legacy, it means I'm dead, which hit really hard when you're watching that afterwards. But I think when you are building something, when you're in it, you're just kind of in it, and you want to build something great. But I think once it starts to become successful is when the legacy thing starts to creep in. Like when you're just building it, you're just trying to make something, right? Like I don't think when I was building 0 to 60, I don't think there was ever a moment in my life where I was at no point, because we were still, the magazine died early. So it was like, it died because the print industry died. So I don't think we ever achieved any kind of greatness with it, right? But I'll be places and people will be like, man, I love 0 to 60. And I realized there was this small little legacy that we built. It wasn't really intentional. It was like we were just trying to make something great and trying to make something different. And we really loved that magazine, and we poured so much into it as a team, everyone who was involved with it. And I think when we were doing Hoonigan, I don't think I started to think about the legacy of what Hoonigan was and and then what it had done and what the culture change and shift was around it until probably a couple years ago. And I think you actually start to do that as the company itself shifts, as people leave, and and you realize that's an era that just ended, right? Employees, and that's I think a hard thing for people to understand is I think when you watch Hoonigan from the outside, you think about it as a group of friends. But at the end of the day, it's employees, and people do different things in life, and sometimes people either want to go do their own thing, they don't want to do it anymore. You guys both know this, and I think this is something that is hard for people to understand who don't understand it. Is fame affects different people differently, right? And some people enjoy it, some people really come to life, some people it changes their personalities, and other people hate it. Right, and they really don't want to be around it. And I will tell you, in my experience, the people that you think love it actually hate it. It's weird to see that. The people, because they're kind of acting the whole time, and then they turn it off and they don't want to be around it anymore. And I think that a lot of that happened at Hoonigan as we started to really sort of explode. 2016 to 2018 was sort of this we just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden you're getting recognized in airports and it's not even at car events anymore. You're out to dinner and people are recognizing you. And I think for a lot of us, there was a element of that. And Hurt and I used to always joke about this, which was we're famous, but we don't have famous money. So we can't, we don't you're famous, but you're sitting coach next to somebody who now is talking to you nonstop, and you just want to watch your movie and not deal with that, And I think when that started to happen and moments, I started to realize we were never going to be the company we were anymore. Even if things seemed to be getting bigger or better, when we stopped making Daily Transmission, I think that was maybe the first time that I started to think about legacy. I don't know if I put that word on it, but I realized that was an end of an era. We were never going to go back and make that again. And at a certain point, and then it's a thing that no one really likes talking about. It's yeah, that was the show everybody loved and everyone enjoyed it, but I think at a certain point, the crew just didn't enjoy making it anymore, and that came through, and you try to make it work, but it doesn't. And then we went and did something else, and we all did the show Scumbag Labs, and we loved it. It was so much fun to make that, right? And and it actually did bigger views and had a bigger audience, but there was this core element, and it's like bands. You love a band's first album. You just love that first album, and you just want them to go back and make that first album. But when they were making that first album, They didn't have the things that came with the second album, the third album. They did it in a rented studio from a friend, or they lie, cheat, steal. They did whatever hook or crook to be able to make that album, and you lose a lot of that energy once you become successful, which is like a really weird thing because and then it's not as easy to get back to that stuff, and then it starts to become disingenuous. And I think as I grew something like Hoonigan, and even with Ken Block, you start to go back to things where you're like, we don't enjoy this as a group to make this as much as we used to. We want to do something new. And then the audience doesn't always want that new. So you kind of are like in this weird world of like, you're trying to deliver something that maybe doesn't serve for you. And, I love new things. So like for me, and there's a famous quote, I think on the Amazon Prime thing from Ken, where Ken was like, if it works, we're going to keep doing it. But Scotto wants to do something different just because he's bored. And like there was that for me. Like there was this really exciting era, and our audience jokes about it a lot because it's like they always like, oh, another new show, because we were just launching like all new show ideas because I just wanted to build and build and build. And once I realized that like YouTube deleted the gatekeeper and I could like just make TV style shows and put them up on YouTube, and I was able to find enough funding to be able to support all of that, we went for it. Were all of them good? Nah, some of them were okay, but some of them were really fun. We did the show called Build and Battle, which was fantastic. We did a bunch of adventure stuff that was great. We did Scumbag Labs, which I loved. We launched a whole content series around Ken, which like he fought me on because he didn't really want to do it. But there was a lot of stuff that we did that was like a lot of fun in that era. And once the era is behind you, you're like, you realize the value of it later on. I think it's very hard to understand the value of it when you're in it. And I think if you worry too much about the value of it when you're in it, then you're like looking at the wrong reasons to do it, right? And that's this is like a whole conversation on like why we do what we do and like what motivates us and all of that. But I think there's definitely this balance of like serving an audience and making them happy. And there's this big joke that it's like my title is Chief Creative Officer. But I get called two other things. One is Chief Complication Officer, because I just complicate everything because I enjoy complications and chaos. And the other one is Chief Comment Officer, because like I read a lot of the comments from the audience, right? And I know some people don't like to. Like, do you read your comments?
I do.
You do?
If we're talking YouTube specifically, I'll read the first couple days, and then after that, I kind of don't really go back.
You really only need the first 6 or 7 hours, because like that's where you get a lot of it. After that, the comments kind of change because now you're getting outsiders who aren't really your core audience anymore. So you do read them. Yeah, I was wondering, because some people don't.
I try to respond to them. I mean, I have my phases. Like sometimes I just really won't be in the mood to accidentally stumble across something that is
super
really messed
negative
up.
Or toxic.
So then I won't put myself in the situation to read them. But I enjoy hearing the audience's feedback because it's always going to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always have to look at it like an outlier situation. The super, super, super positive stuff, just ignore it. Like they will just say everything's great. Yeah. Right? And the super, super negative stuff that's like weirdly toxic, they've got a problem with something else, just ignore it and like find that stuff in the middle.
I used to not even read them.
Yeah, I think anyone who's female in our space sometimes gets really fucking creepy shit, but also like some like unnecessarily fucking toxic bullshit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think I've actually like I actually think I replied to one on yours once.
I've seen you do that in the past. Yeah.
Step the fuck. Like you need to check yourself real quick.
Yeah, I never like to play the female card. But
no, I know. But at the same time, it's like people just say things. I'm like, you wouldn't fucking say that to me.
Yeah.
Like,
the criticism that I get because of my gender versus someone else who, like, I always feel like I have to work twice as hard to get half the respect.
For sure.
But,
I read a great comment the other day that just made me laugh. They were like, they had some like video of me, and they were like, "Oh, it's Han," and then this guy wrote, he's like, "Man, Han is turning into Chaeyoung fat," because my face looked a little fat. It actually I just like spit out my drink. And I was like, this guy's super clever. I mean,
sometimes they'll get like sometimes the commenters will get a good knock, and you're like, oh, it's pretty fucking
touche.
Good.
Am I getting a little fat? Maybe I need to exercise a little bit more.
Oh my god,
that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, Well, because I like obviously for me the big joke is like most of my cars don't run, and, but like and sometimes like the comments are like hilarious. Like someone I bought that farm and someone named it Avocado because it's an avocado farm, and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then it was like Avocado Farms, and then someone added Avocado Farms and Salvage because I have a bunch of cars. I was like, this is great. I was like, I'm just gonna steal all your guys' names.
That's
like,
great.
It was fantastic. Avocado Farms and Salvage.
It should be on the side of a truck. A work truck.
Yeah. It's funny. I was like, the end salvage is great because you're like, what? So yeah, so I got a bunch of cars parked on the property. So, but anyway, where were we before the
legacy?
Yeah,
legacy.
you're talking about your legacy.
I mean, look, obviously, I dealt a lot this year with like the legacy of Ken Block. I mean, that was something that was very much, just front of brain. I mean, it was front of brain probably earlier than it should have been. Like I was still dealing with and trying to like understand what had happened, but also thinking about like how do we message this, right? Like we have to do that. And then when on the first day, like I couldn't even deal with the situation. I had Ron. I was like, hey, dude, you need to like Ron Zaris, who's like always been like my second hand and worked directly with Ken for years. I was like, I need you to do this because like I can't deal with this right now. And like I think we had some fun moments in that because we were. I don't want to say fun. Fun's the wrong word, but we had moments that made us smile, which was we had this thing of like, if we had to send this to Ken right now, would he even approve this, or would like he just like rip us apart for this, And that kind of kept him alive in a way for us. But like I think you look at the legacy side of it, and it became very important to like myself, a lot of other people around him, obviously Lucy and the family, and it's like, well, yeah, how does Ken get remembered through all of this, right? And like the things that like I knew were like really important to Ken, and like what Ken wanted to see him, what mattered to Ken, right? And I think the thing is like Ken will always be famous for the Gymkhana films, but like Ken loved being a rally car driver. Like that was a thing he loved, but he also loved being like the marketing person and like understanding the audience. Like I think all of us, who knew Ken from the automotive side don't realize that like he'd already had, or if they realize that they don't understand it deeply, like they don't realize like that he had 20 years of like being a very successful businessman in the marketing space, and like that was a big part of his identity, right? And it's like for me that's like what my identity is, right? Like I'm not a race car driver, like I can stitch together a decent time on a track, but like that's not who I am. And that's like, and like he didn't become that till later. He didn't start racing till he was 36, right? And so he already had this like very successful thing that he did with 8-Ball and Drawers and Dub and obviously DC Shoes and and all of that. And he had all these other people who like in many ways owe their careers, in many parts to him, right? And like legends, right? Rob Dyrdek, Danny Way, all these people who like Ken was the person who helped them go chase these really big ideas, right? And Ken was that for me too. And I think it's weird because like as we walked away from like all of this, and we had this memorial for Ken, and which was really amazing. It was really difficult, but it was really amazing. And like there was just this constant thing that like we're here, it's 500 people who all knew Ken, right? Like everyone here had either worked with him, worked for him, was friends with him, was family. And so like these are the people who like really knew Ken, right? This isn't just the people who knew him from afar. And there was like this one thing that just kept repeating, and it was like Ken was so good at creating opportunity for people. He never gave it away for free. Like you had to work hard for it. It was never free, but he could like spot things in people and then like just basically expect it from you, right? And I was like, that was what he did. And I think about that in his legacy, and it's like I think like about like what I want Ken's legacy to be, and and I don't really think about my own, but I hope I'm remembered well. But like I think in Ken's legacy, it's so easy for people to be like, oh, he was this amazing driver, right? And like Gymkhana and like all of that. And like that's like very superficial, and I think that's a very simple one to look at. But if you look at it more of like, well, Ken created this opportunity for so many of us because like he rewrote the paradigm of like how to get sponsored and how to build entertainment. This word is overused, but like he disrupted automotive motorsport. Like he disrupted automotive marketing and motorsports 100%. I remember how people couldn't understand why we did things the way we did. Like we were working in WRC, in the FIA, and they were like threatening to fine me because I wasn't sending out press releases. And I'm like, why do I have to send out a press release? Like we're going to do this on Facebook. Like we're going to do, like we're going to speak directly to our audience. We're going to reach more people than our email list are going to get to. Like, why does this matter? You know, and it seemed normal for us, but it was really like taking a different approach at it. And, you know, so I think in a lot of ways, I hope that right now, you know, it's not even been a year, and I think everyone just misses him from like what he gave the community in terms of videos. To me, I hope that in 10 years from now, if you look back and, you know, someone does a retrospective or a doc on like the importance of Ken, I think a lot of it is that I think he really helped kind of usher in like a different way of like the automotive world sort of looking at like entertainment and like the value of marketing and doing things different and bringing all of that in. And I think that in a way, like I think he would be happier with that legacy than just like, oh, he was the guy that did Gymkhana. But like it was more than Gymkhana. I mean, even just the idea to create some, you know, Hoonigan and to do all of that. I mean, we were kind of at a forefront of when all of that stuff was happening. I think that was this thing that if you really look at it, you dig into it, like that was the legacy, was he created this thing. And then in a way, I think paved a path for so many other people. Before the Gymkhana films, like BMW or Porsche, like they weren't asking for cars to be slid around in commercials. Yeah. Like that like changed the way that people saw cars as exciting. And like you talk to people in the Hollywood world and they'll be like, oh yeah, we changed the way that we did stunt driving after we saw the Gymkhana films, right? And like, so like that was this cool inspiration behind it. But it's like, it's not just the films, it's like, what did the films affect that created this longer lasting change, right? And I think, I mean, it sucks to say this, but like, you know, there's this thought of like, man, you wish you could hear what people say about you after you're gone. And I think that like, I remember Ron and I just being like, man, like if Ken could just see the amount of appreciation that he has now that like maybe he didn't realize was there while he was alive. I think that that's like what like real legacy looks like, because it wasn't just the thing he made. Like you can make a great film or you can make a great statue or whatever, but how did that inspire someone else? Like I think that's the important legacy, because if you just did something that was really cool but it didn't make someone else do something really cool out of it, well then what is that? That I think is a real legacy, versus just being like, oh, they were the best at this. That's cool. But like, were they the best at it and inspired someone else to be better? Like that's kind of cool, because I'll hear people sometimes be like, "Oh, these guys are like they're way better than you now," and I'm like, "Yeah, but I also know that like they've told me that like we like helped pave the way for them. So like I hope they're better, because if you do something and then the person who comes up behind you doesn't do it better, like well, you bushwhacked. The next person has to clear the path, and then the person after that has to pave it, and the person after that puts in some railings and then some lights, and eventually you have a nice little sidewalk, right? And it's like, but everyone has to improve that path, especially if you went down it first, right? So it's like, and I'm not saying that we were entirely first, but we were pretty early on a lot of it, and I think that that's part of that legacy, is like being a part of that community side of it. So anyway, I go completely around on this one,
beautiful.
But tangential, but yeah, that's kind of the
beautiful.
thought there.
Well, I think you've definitely, and what you guys have built over at Hoonigan have inspired so many people, and not just in the car community, but what you said early on, which I think has stuck with me this whole conversation, and I'll take away is just go figure it out.
So my
do
mom
cool
said,
shit. Don't be an asshole.
Yeah,
what a great lesson.
Figuring it out on your own is such a great thing. I mean, you know this. How much stuff have you figured out from both the content side of this to even just like how to make something work on a car, and you're like, I don't know, I guess the amount of other people's YouTube stuff I watch to make my own YouTube stuff is incredible.
And it's a good tool to have to just learn how to figure things out. You don't have to be right, but it's taking the initiative to get out of your comfort zone.
Oh yeah, for sure. So what was the other question you had? You had one.
Oh, I was going to ask you a question, but I didn't know if I wanted to follow up talking about legacy, because it was such a beautiful conversation. You were talking about different eras being different things that you enjoy at the time in your life.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what are you enjoying now?
It's interesting. I definitely have. I don't know if I've thought about today. I definitely have thought about like what are some of the peak moments for me, right? Like just in my career. I'm in my 40s. You start to like think about things like that. But like 0 to 60 magazine was like a really big peak. It was so much fun and it felt so adventurous. And we had no idea what we were doing. And we were just faking it till we make it. And that was super fun. Obviously, the similar thing in early Hoonigan. Daily Transmission era was great. I think something else that's really interesting for me now is I'm watching like a major shift in content in the space, you know? So like looking more at like what the future of Hoonigan can be in like a short form space, and also being like more collaborative with other people right now is like really where like my interests lie, instead of, you know, kind of for a long time I will say like Hoonigan had its collaborative years, but we also very much had like our like, you know, sort of like Rock of Solitude style era.
I've always seen you guys being very collaborative and supportive of other creators.
We're definitely supportive. I think if I have any regrets is I wish like, and I know we worked on stuff in the past and tried to get it work, but like I wish we would have pushed harder. And not that we still can't, but like I wish we had like worked harder to like have just done more like things like let's just do a show with Emelia that like, you know, like that I think is where I really wanted to get to more earlier on, and we did a bit with some people, but I look at the space now and I think that the more collaborative the whole space can be, just the more powerful we all are as sort of like, whether you want to call us influencers, creators, whatever the hell it is. But like, I think there's a lot of value in that.
Well, maybe that's the next era.
Yeah, maybe that's the next era. And like I said, I think that that's the part I'm kind of excited about now is that stuff. And I love like the energy of like a lot of the young, you know, like sort of up and coming creators, like let's just say like the sub 100,000 followers, like because it's still new and exciting for them, and you know there's something really there's a great energy there, and like I don't totally lose that energy, and I think this is the thing that frustrates a lot of people sometimes is like I have a new idea and I get excited about it like it's the first idea I ever had, right? And like I like, but I also want everyone else to have that level of excitement too. And I think sometimes, you know, you need to shift things up and have and work with different people on that. And I also think that other people need to shift their things up and work with different people. Like Hurt's a perfect example. I love Hurt. He's like a brother to me. He was like employee number 4. And now like he's going and chasing something new. He's still friends and family with Hoonigan. We'll still make content with him, but like he's chasing this whole other thing on his own and his stuff he's doing with T-Pain. And it's like, that's rad. Like people need to go do that. They need to kind of like go break up the model of doing different stuff. And, you know, and that to me is kind of exciting, is to kind of watch like what happens with sort of that, the extended family of Hoonigan, right? Like, and I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this conversation of like the Auto Creek side. Like when I did my car club, there was only 25 of us in it, but we would have all these other car clubs that would come out and do everything with us. And I really would love to like make sure that we like shift more back into that and get more on the like, hey, come, you know, we want you to be a part of this. We want you to do this. Like, let's make some cool stuff together, because the broadness of that is to me what makes everything. It's always been the fun part of Hoonigan. Yeah. And then the other thing that like, you know, I've just been enjoying kind of like fully embracing my own weirdness and the stuff I like, and just dealing with that instead of like, I know you know this, instead of making stuff for the audience, making stuff for myself and then hoping that an audience shows up. Like I've really leaned back into like my Volkswagen roots. I enjoy it. I know it's not exactly what everybody in the audience wants, but like it kind of makes me happy. And then that helps me drive the other creative that makes the audience happy.
100%.
It's this weird thing. You got to do enough stuff that like you still kind of enjoy that.
You still have to feed the soul at the end of the day.
I think right now it's an interesting time, and a big one of that really is like just looking at like how everything is shifting in social and all of that. So, and like the whole space we're in. We could get into a whole conversation of like how I kind of think social media is ruining the society, but at the same time we all work in it as a business and like trying to kind of lever and live in between those. And I think you do obviously know that, you know, and like mental health's a big part of like your, you know, I think your storyline and everything in there, and like, you know, being the piece on social that's the positive part and not the negative part, I think is like super important for us in the car industry, because like we shouldn't be the negative part. We should be the part that like makes you excited to go build and inspire you to do stuff, not make you feel bad about yourself, kind of thing. So yeah.
Well said.
I don't know. Any last question?
No, I think we got to let you go, Brian.
We could talk forever.
Thanks, Brian.